As a creator in any medium, be that visual art, music, game design, or writing, for example, you can get a lot of mileage out of taking a critical eye to a work of that form and picking apart what works about it and what doesn't. I'm a writer, or at least I fancy myself as one, so I'm in the fortunate position where most types of media or art use writing in some capacity, and that includes video games. One such series of games would be Five Nights at Freddy's, which I feel I should assume most people my age or younger are at least passingly familiar with in the year 2025. Full stop, I grew up on these games. I remember so clearly being 10 years old and my buddy Christian asking me if I had heard about this new scary game, then getting home and looking it up on my iPod only to get scared by Bonnie in YouTube thumbnails. Further exposure to Let's Plays and theories, combined with being at an unfortunate age where my neuroplastic brain glommed onto the weirdest stuff, led to a lifelong obsession, and that's just kind of etched into my soul, I guess. It's kind of dumb in retrospect, but FNAF was among my first times seeing any story be told in such a scattered and piecemeal way. And even as my immediate interest in the games, books, and fandom declined for a time, I still really appreciated what it did and what it taught me. All that is to say that when I was mulling over what interests of mine I'd picked apart as a writer to learn from, it wasn't much of a surprise that a script on FNAF practically just fell out of me. First things first though, when you mention the writing of FNAF, you're immediately gonna get a raised eyebrow and a snarky statement like, what writing? And yeah, the vague storytelling of FNAF has probably been as controversial as it has been core to the appeal of the series. This is where the first lesson I learned comes in, which is to be mindful of your storytelling. With storytelling as the operative idea, I see the term as the how of your writing. How it is you tell the story of whatever it is you're making. Be that a narrator giving dry exposition, the hidden logs detailing an in-universe phenomena, or whatever other framing device you're using. To say the least, FNAF's methods are weird, though not on paper. Diegetic and tasteful exposition from phone guys and hand units and short cryptic minigames are as fine a way to provide lore as any. So what got mixed up? Why is FNAF's story considered so hard to understand? I'll admit I do think a bit of this comes from the fandom and people overcomplicating things, but if I have to staple it onto any one concrete thing, I'd have to say it comes from a lack of grounding information. I'm not the first to point this out, but the more information the games, books, and other related media throw onto the pile, and the less of that information we know to even be true or reliable, the more people lose grasp on what they know to be true. Who Caused the Bite of 87 is the perfect example of this, as even though it's an event we've known of since the beginning, people still cannot get on the same page about who did it or who it happened to. Hell, it's not even an important event, but it's a great microcosm of the issue, because whether it comes to if a given character is real or not, if or when a given event happened, or some other nugget of lore that would make the backbone of a timeline or character arc, it's still the case that vagueness abounds. Everything we think we know about William, the nature of the animatronics, when anything takes place, and all the other juicy bits that people would actually care about are put into question when any new revelations come our way. Which is fun in its own right, but so frustrating as someone wanting to understand the story, you know? All this was really effective in keeping people coming back in the early years, but at least for me, it's been hard to invest myself in the overall story ever since Help Wanted maybe not retconned a bunch of stuff. And that's as someone who still watches new theories and keeps up with everything that comes out. Now the question is this bad storytelling? I don't know if bad is appropriate, but I do feel comfortable calling it haphazard storytelling without giving your audience clear information to work with. Dates, places, motivations, characters involved in certain events, etc. It makes it kind of difficult to not just put together the story like a puzzle, but also to get invested in it. Like, how many people really know what the story of FNAF is? Not just the premise, not every detail about the color of every version of Foxy's eyes. No, the story, the character arcs, that fun stuff. I'm trying to keep in mind as I write to be sure to give readers the stable ground of establishing info that they need before I start going crazy with the vagaries and the metaphors and stuff. Side note, this is why I hold Pizzeria Simulator in such high regard, as far as writing goes anyways, because the gameplay is hit or miss. The true and insanity endings of that game give such explicit insight into what Henry was feeling and what he wanted, all delivered with an excellently haunting performance and with incredible ambiance. Mwah, mwah, mwah. I will give that game's ending so much props, because this is how you end and tell the ending of a story. That said, I want you to imagine a man, a veritable animatronics industry icon whose technical wizardry brings his and his partner's creations to life. Yet for all of his genius, he fails to give proper attention to his young daughter, and when her life is taken, the man knows it's his partner's fault. He can feel it in his gut, and as more kids go missing and his partner's behavior becomes increasingly erratic, he knows it more and more. Yet he does nothing. Through his own cowardice and inaction, he lets a wound first inflicted on him spill out into so much more, until years later, he realizes the true depths of the depravity that his partner is responsible for, and which he, in turn, feels responsible for as well. Armed with this new knowledge and a resolve to end everything he failed to stop from happening, as well as to save his daughter, he brings all of them together in one place. It's a pretty compelling idea for a character and their struggles, but this notion of who Henry is one largely scraped together from different sources, with parts from the books, parts from the games, sure, but a lot left up to interpretation. Fan interpretation. This is where lesson 2 comes in. Fanfiction is kind of awesome. 2 reactions now ensue. Hell yes, and are you serious? To the latter, I get it, but keep it in check. I know the kind of image that comes to mind for many people when the term fanfic gets thrown around, but I promise you that there is a lot of good stuff you're missing out on. In fact, if you like a piece of media or art, there's definitely a fic out there for you. Did a series you love have a disappointing ending? Was there a side character you wish got more focus? Did the author keep referencing a bunch of events and characters that occurred 1,000 years before the story, which influenced the motivations of several major characters, but which he does not follow up on because he's obviously setting up a spin-off, but you don't want to wait for that? Fanfiction has you covered. But what does this mean for FNAF? I mean, it's far from the first franchise to have fanfiction about it, but it was my first experience with it, and it's only by looking back that I realize how much it made me appreciate FNAF proper. I mentioned Henry, for example, but my characterization of him is one put together through the interpretations of myself and like-minded fans, and it offered me a new way of connecting to him that the official media of the series hadn't quite. The thing is, though, I don't know how much credit to give this series for this. I mean, the pieces are in place for us because of it, but then it didn't quite put them together. We did. Another favorite example of mine would be Henry's daughter, Charlotte. Here we have a young girl whose life is snuffed out suddenly and unfairly by the man her father trusted. By fate alone, she gets a second chance at life by possessing the security puppet. And when her killer takes the lives of more innocent children, she uses her unique ability to give them that same second chance. Without consideration for if they want to simply move on or not, she binds their spirits to animatronics and sets them on the same mission she has: revenge. From there, she dons herself as a guardian to the lost souls and the sole warrior against her killer, and she fails again and again and again. She's only a child, after all, and so fails over and over to stop tragedy from occurring, only to find salvation from her father, who failed to save her all those years ago. It's a portrait of a character that really speaks to me, but most of that is just conjecture. fanfiction on my part. Shout out to Day Shift at Freddy's, by the way, for opening my eyes to such a fantastic interpretation of this character. Anyways, I think as a writer you can get a lot of mileage from taking a look at fanfiction of your faves, or even giving your own a try. Truthfully, we kind of do it all the time. The statement I made earlier about Henry is what you might call headcanon, but I would stand by the argument that headcanon and fanfiction are just two sides of the same coin. And we all have our own headcanons about plenty of stuff in the media we enjoy, because, well, you can't explain all the minutia, you know? At a certain point in writing, you just kind of have to trust your audience to put things together themselves, which is something I know I need to get better at myself. Alright, I don't have a smooth segue into the third lesson, so we're just going to dive into it with a question for the class. What is FNAF about? We're not talking about the plot and its events, but the themes and ideas that permeate across the many games and books. To be honest with you, I don't think there was a whole lot of consideration for this throughout most of the series, which, hey, not really a big deal in the face of it, but it starts to strain things in the long run. When something goes on for a while, be it a show or book franchise or what have you, you need to branch out enough to keep things fresh, right? However, the longer this goes on, the more you risk losing what gives the media identity in the first place. The characters, setting, events, and, for our purposes, themes. I'd argue that FNAF has certain themes, like sins of the father, corruption of innocence and nostalgia, and even arguably survivor's guilt is seen through Michael and Henry. And the way these themes are explored is through characters or concepts like, I don't know, children haunting animatronics, or dead siblings, or dead daughters, or whatever. These ideas, I think it's fair to say, defined the series, and their exploration gave it direction and identity. There's been a shift, however, especially over the past couple of years, away from these themes, which people have definitely noticed. I'd argue it started all the way back when Sister Location and the Silver Eyes released, when not only did the mode and focus of storytelling shift, but we also saw a lean away from the supernatural and into sci-fi, something Scott comments on in his first interview with Dawko. People have certainly noticed it too, as introducing stuff like AI and robot replicas of previous characters, Phasgoo, and even something like Remnant and the more scientific explanations of agony are certainly cool in their own right, but they absolutely push up against the original tone and concepts, at least a little. I mean, in the interview, after the bit about Sister Location, Scott says that he's just more used to and comfortable with that palette, so over time he naturally drifted in that direction, which is pretty evident in his stuff prior to FNAF. Bat and Freddy in Space, which I know exists just so he can scratch that itch. I will die on that hill. But to bring this around, I think the takeaway for me has been much the same as the first lesson, which is to just be aware of all this when writing. I know I don't just speak for myself when I say that when you're writing a really extensive, complicated project with tons of characters, events, concepts, and whatnot, it'll sometimes leave you lost in the sauce. But when you, say, have to axe a ton of that content because it wasn't the right fit for the story, I would know. It's going to be the themes of your work that you lean up against to get going again. And I think that's probably all for now. If I let myself dig deeper on it, I could probably find some more ways this series has affected my ethos in writing and make that into a second video. But for now, I have a lot of other media and art I want to cover in the same lens, so we'll see. Either way, thank you for sticking around. This is my first video on YouTube, and it's kind of dumb, but I've been interested in making a channel since I was like 10, and I've just never had it in me to commit until this year. I'm certain this will be a lesson for a future video, but I have a huge perfectionism problem. So every previous attempt I always shot down before I even really got started. This is the farthest I've gotten so far, even just recording this, so I'm hoping that'll finally change. I'm willing to learn as I go and be okay with things even if they're not perfect. But that said, I really enjoyed making this one, and I have a ton more ideas in the pipeline, so I plan to stick with it for now. Thank you again so much. Please subscribe if you're interested in seeing more of what I have to offer, and bye-bye.